Five mystifying alien abduction stories. Number 5. Kirsan Alumjanov. Kirsan is a Russian politician and champion chess player who claims to have had a wild encounter aboard an alien spaceship in September of 1997. At the time of the incident, Kirsan was asleep at his apartment in Moscow. He recalls being awoken by the sound of his balcony door opening and someone calling to him. Kirsan, apparently channeling every dumb horror movie victim ever, decided to walk toward the ominous voice in the darkness instead of hightailing it out of there. As he approached the door, he noticed what he described as a transparent half-tube that he proceeded to climb into and saw humanoid figures wearing yellow spacesuits. The tube led him onto a spaceship that transported him into outer space. Kirsan claims that the aliens gave him a spacesuit that had a dial on the front that allowed him to adjust the oxygen level in the suit. Unlike your typical abduction story that contains a fair amount of probing and harassment, he claims that the aliens didn't pay much attention to him. He did say that he was given a tour of their ship, which he claimed was enormous, with one of its chambers the size of a football field. Kirsan says he communicated with the beings through thoughts, and that he traveled with them to another planet to pick up some probes from its surface. I knew there had to be probes somewhere. He asked them to interact with humans, but they told him they were not ready to make contact. Eventually he asked to be taken home as he had important business to attend to in the coming days. The aliens dropped him off back at his balcony in the morning, where he was met by his bewildered assistants who had arrived earlier and couldn't understand where Kirsan had disappeared to. After his encounter, Kirsan became convinced that aliens had gifted humans with the game of chess, noting that archaeologists have found evidence of chess being played by ancient civilizations all over the world with similar rules. He also points out the similarity of the 64 squares on a chessboard and the 64 codons in human DNA. Number 4. Betty and Barney Hill. Betty and Barney Hill were a married couple who in September of 1961 were driving home after a vacation at Niagara Falls. They had just passed Lancaster, New Hampshire, when Betty noticed a bright point of light moving in the sky. She initially thought it was a falling star, but the light appeared to be moving upward. The object began moving erratically and seemed to be growing bigger and brighter, so the couple pulled the car over to get a closer look while giving their dog a walk. Betty used binoculars to get a closer look and described an odd-looking craft with flashing multicolored lights. Barney was unconvinced and thought it was just a commercial airliner until he saw the craft begin rapidly descending in his direction. The couple quickly returned to their car and continued driving, watching the disc-shaped craft, which they estimated to be at least 60 feet long, zigzag throughout the sky. The craft eventually got so close to their 57 Chevy Bel Air that Barney stopped in the middle of the highway. As the craft hovered about 80 to 100 feet above their vehicle, Barney grabbed his pistol and exited the car. Once again using the binoculars, he looked up and claimed to see 8 to 10 humanoid figures staring down at him from the craft's windows. All but one of the figures moved away from the windows as a long structure descended from the craft. Barney instantly got in the car in a panic, fearing they would be captured. He drove away as fast as he could, instructing Betty to watch for the craft. As she rolled down her window and looked up, they began to hear a series of beeping and buzzing noises, accompanied by a tingling sensation in their bodies, which was followed by what was described as an altered state of consciousness that left their minds dulled. After another series of beeps, They regained their senses and discovered that they had traveled 35 miles down the road with only spotty memories of their time. They arrived home around dawn and began to notice strange things, including their watches no longer working, a strange pink powder on Betty's now torn dress, and concentric circles on the trunk of their car that caused a compass needle to whirl rapidly when held at close range to the circles. Not sure what compelled them to perform this experiment, but yeah. 10 days after the occurrence, Betty had a string of incredibly vivid dreams that would last 5 days and prompt her and Barney to seek a hypnotist. What they uncovered in those sessions matched Betty's dreams very closely. They recalled turning off the highway and into the woods shortly after they heard the beeping noises and being surrounded by 3 men who led them onto the craft. They were then separated and led into exam rooms where they were looked over and, you guessed it, probed, with Barney believing that a sperm sample was taken from him as well. They both recall communicating with the beings in English, but claim it was through thought transference. Betty remembers asking where the aliens were from and being shown a star map with trade routes that she would attempt to recreate later. She was also given a book to keep, but claims the beings changed their minds and attempted to wipe their memories after a disagreement upon leaving. Teacher and amateur astronomer Marjorie Fish would become interested in the story and spend years analyzing the star map looking for a match. She eventually came to the conclusion that the aliens the Hills had encountered were from the Zeta Reticuli star system, about 39 light-years from Earth. This interpretation of the star map has long been a subject of debate amongst astronomers, but as our space viewing technology has improved at calculating distances, even Fish herself has come to reject this hypothesis. Number 3. The Allagash Abductions. In the summer of 1976, 4 men in their early 20s headed out on a fishing trip in Allagash, Maine. Twin brothers Jim and Jack, their friend Charlie, and their guide Chuck. The first night of their trip passed without incident, but on the second night they witnessed a bright light not far from their campsite. They thought it was a bit odd, but waved it off as a helicopter or weather balloon. The next day passed again without the men seeing anything, including fish. After a bummer catch, they decided to try fishing again after the sun went down. As it got dark, the men built a blazing campfire on the shore that would burn for several hours and act as a beacon for their campsite. Then they headed out onto Eagle Lake. After just a short time, Chuck noticed the same bright light that they had seen previously, in the distance above the tree line. It appeared to be very large this time, and soundless. The men grabbed a flashlight and attempted to signal the source of the light. Suddenly, a bright beam of light emanated from the object as it began to make its way toward the men. Understandably freaked out by this sudden reaction, they began furiously paddling back to shore, but they quickly realized they wouldn't make it before the craft reached them. The men and their canoe were enveloped by the light. The next thing they knew, they were back on the shore at their campsite, standing at the edge of the water and staring at the craft, which they claim was hovering only a few dozen feet away. After watching it for several minutes, the men report the craft imploded and reappeared above the tree line across the lake, then shot straight upward into the sky. Although the men felt as though they had only been on the lake for a very short time, they noticed that the large fire they had built had already been reduced to embers. The men went to sleep and spoke little of the incident, but moved their campsite the next morning. It wasn't long after the trip that all 4 men began experiencing terrifying nightmares of being held and examined by beings with long arms, large heads, and big metallic glowing eyes with no lids. This prompted all the men to undergo hypnosis therapy, where they experienced additional memories of skin and fluid samples being taken from them. They also remembered being sent through a portal set in the wall of a room on the ship that led them gently back down to their canoe in a beam of light. After the sessions, the men were able to draw recreations of some of the things they saw. All 4 also passed lie detector tests and cleared psychiatric exams. Number 2. Elizabeth Clarer. Elizabeth was a woman from South Africa who claimed to have had several encounters with an alien race, as well as giving birth to a human-alien hybrid child. In 1954, while living on the Whiteleaf farm in the Natal Midlands, she heard that the native Zulu people were reporting sightings of the lightning bird in the sky, a mythical creature from the folklore of South African tribes. Curious, Elizabeth took a trip to the aptly named Flying Saucer Hill the very next day and claims to have seen a starship descend from the sky. She said it hovered about 3 meters over the ground and emitted no sound other than a soft hum. She also claims that while the central dome of the ship remained stationary, its hull spun continuously. And on the central dome there were 3 portholes where she could see a spaceman staring back at her. She tried to approach the ship, but a barrier of heat kept her from coming any closer, and then it flew away. About 18 months later, Elizabeth would again return to Flying Saucer Hill after further reports of the lightning bird. On this occasion, April 7, 1956, she claims that the same ship landed and took her on board the craft, which was about 60 feet in diameter. There she met the being she had seen on her previous encounter, who was apparently a botanist and astrophysicist, and she also met the ship's pilot. From there, Elizabeth was transported to what she described as a cigar-shaped mothership with a garden-like interior, where she met some of its inhabitants before being returned to the hilltop. During this encounter, she reportedly exchanged kisses with the astrophysicist alien, who was called Akon. Wait, Akon? Never mind. He told Elizabeth that she was actually the reincarnation of his long-lost Venetian soulmate, and that there were more Venetians living amongst humans on Earth. In July of the same year, the craft appeared again, and Elizabeth was able to capture photographs of it with her sister's brownie box camera. Nearly 2 years later, she claimed that Akon visited her again, and that this time they had experienced a day-long rendezvous together on the high plateau of Cathkin Peak, where he gave her a silver ring and they conceived a child together. When she was nearly due to deliver in 1959, Akon flew her and her car to his home planet of Meton, which supposedly orbited Proxima Centauri and our nearby multiple star system Alpha Centauri. It was there that she gave birth to a son they named Ailing. Elizabeth stayed on the planet for 9 years, which apparently only equates to 4 months of Earth time, but reluctantly came home while Ailing stayed behind to be educated on Meton. She was told that the planetary vibrations had affected her heart and she would no longer be allowed to return. However, Ailing and Akon would make subsequent trips to Earth to visit her. Elizabeth claims that there are no big cities or skyscrapers on Meton, just homes scattered in park-like grounds, and that the planet had an abundance of everything a civilization needs to flourish, including an unlimited supply of energy obtained from the atmosphere and universe, and a lack of a monetary system. Elizabeth would faithfully return to Flying Saucer Hill on April 7th to commemorate her anniversary with Akon, and before she died, she told relatives that Ailing was now an astrophysicist himself, traveling the universe with his father, his spacewoman Clea, and Elizabeth's new grandson. Number 1. Amy Rylance. In October of 2001, Amy Rylance, her husband Keith, and their business partner Petra were busy working on developing the Rylance property in the town of Gundaya in Queensland, Australia. The property would eventually become the Whispering Winds Winery. On the evening of October 4th, just after 9:30 p.m., Amy settled down on the sofa in the lounge area to watch a bit of TV before bed. Keith and Petra were already asleep in their respective bedrooms. She watched for a while as a storm raged outside and eventually fell asleep there. Around 11:30 p.m., Petra would awake to the crashing sound of broken glass and come out into the lounge area to investigate. What she saw there was so bizarre she could hardly comprehend it. Coming through the front window of the lounge area was a rectangular beam of light, and suspended within this beam of light was Amy, still lying in a sleeping position. Petra claims that other various items from a nearby coffee table were also suspended in this light. She then peered outside to determine the source of the light and saw a disc-shaped object hovering above the tree line a short distance away. She was apparently so shocked by what she was witnessing that she fainted. After she regained consciousness, which she believed was only a few minutes, she began to realize what had happened and screamed as loud as she could, waking Keith and sending him out into the lounge area. Petra tried to explain what had happened the best she could, but she was understandably hysterical at this moment and wasn't making much sense. But Keith could see the broken glass and ripped screen on the window, the disarray around the room, and most importantly, the absence of his wife. He stepped outside and frantically searched for Amy, but she was nowhere to be found. He returned to the house where Petra more calmly explained what happened, but he didn't believe her version of events. He went out to search for Amy once more, and when he still couldn't find her, he called the police. They arrived and performed their own search of the property, but were unable to locate her either. They did, however, notice that one of the bushes outside the broken window appeared as though it had been exposed to extreme heat. As the police were in the process of putting together a missing persons report, the phone rang in the house and Keith answered it. A woman was on the line who told him that she had just come across Amy at the petrol station and that she was so confused and dehydrated she had taken her to a hospital. Keith was beyond relieved, but filled with even more questions now, because the woman that had found Amy was calling from the town of McKay, nearly 500 miles away from where Amy had disappeared. After Amy was examined by doctors, she would recount an incredible tale. Amy claims that she fell asleep on the sofa, and the next thing she remembers is waking up on a bench in a strange rectangular room. She claimed that a glow of light emanated from everywhere, but that she couldn't determine the source of the light. She didn't see anyone around, but called out to see if someone would answer her. A male voice seemingly came from nowhere and instructed her to remain calm and that no harm would come to her. Shortly after this, an opening appeared in the wall and a male figure entered wearing a head-to-toe black bodysuit, with only holes for his eyes, nose, and mouth. He once again told her to remain calm and that they would be returning her to a spot not far from where they took her. She recalls falling back asleep and awakening once again, this time on the cold ground. Disoriented and with no idea where she was, she stumbled around until she came across the petrol station and met the woman who would help her. The police got Amy a hotel room for the rest of the night as she waited for Keith and Petra to make the drive to retrieve her. They arrived the next afternoon on October 5th, and the three of them would go over the events of the previous night and try to piece together a timeline. They also noticed some weird signs on Amy herself, including strange triangular arrangements on her body, and the fact that the roots of her hair showed considerable grow-out, even though she had just dyed her hair 2 days previously. Keith was immediately ready to go to the media and had contacted UFO researchers who agreed to investigate. However, when the investigators arrived at the hotel a few days later to interview them, they found that the trio had checked out that same morning. Several voicemails to them went unanswered. Keith would eventually call back out of the blue, saying that their car had been followed for the previous several days by a heavy-duty van, and that they had been forced to move to a hiding spot because of this Men in Black type experience. He would call again several days later but gave no new info about their current location. The case is still officially open, but no one has heard from Keith, Amy, or Petra since. It is rumored that they may be hiding out in northern England.